Hello everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we're taking a look at the Blood Death Knight on the Shadowlands beta for World of Warcraft. We looked at the Frost Death Knight yesterday, and we're going to look at Unholy tomorrow. And we've already looked at several classes, and we'll be looking at all the remaining specs and classes over the next couple of weeks as well. So lots of Shadowlands stuff coming towards you. Also a reminder that if you're interested in the weak auras, that you're seeing in the stream in my UI. I did a video on my UI, and of course I'm currently uploading my weak aura as just free access on my Patreon. You know, just so you guys can pop onto the Patreon, and just a clever bit of cross promotion. Of course, you don't need to donate or anything to see those weak aura strings. They're just there. They're fairly basic, I would say, but hey, if you like them, then you're welcome to grab them. Without any further ado, though, let us dive into the video, and let's check out the Blood Death Knight. Alright guys, and here we are in-game with our Vulpera Blood DK, a fearsome foe indeed. But let us, before we dive into what's new, let's just give a brief recap of what the core gameplay of the Blood Death Knight is, especially for people who are new to the spec and who are looking to pick up a new spec in Shadowlands. What is Blood DK in Shadowlands all about? So let's go break it down. Number one, first of all, as you will see, and we have it in our weak auras here as well, the Blood DK, just like the other DK specs, has runes, 6 runes, and runic power. You can have up to 125 runic power by default. So you use your runes on your abilities. You can recharge up to 3 runes at a time. So again, rough rule of thumb is always have 3 runes spent. So you have 3 runes always recharging, getting that value. Whenever you spend a rune, you get 10 runic power. So that's going to be, generally speaking, how you generate runic power. What is this going to translate into? Well, this is going to fuel our core active mitigation. So Mara Rend is probably your most important rune spender. You're going to smash the target, doing a bit of damage. Not a whole ton of damage, about 570 physical damage. But the important thing here is that it generates 3 charges of Bone Shield. Bone Shield protects you with a barrier of Whirling Bones, which increase your armor by 400, your haste by 10%. However, each melee attack against you does consume a stack, consumes a charge. And yeah, it's going to last 30 seconds. Whenever you do it, it obviously refreshes it. And as you can see right there, we went from 9 to 10. 10 is the max stacks that you can have. Again, this is a massive deal for your defense. The haste obviously is great. You can see with Bone Shield active, I have 1,000 armor for 30% damage reduction against physical attacks. If I remove the Bone Shield, I go down to 650 armor, which is about 20% damage reduction against physical attacks. And physical damage is the majority of what you're taking, of course, so maintaining your Bone Shield is always like a top priority. Generally speaking, you're looking to stay above 5 stacks, which does tie into a talent, and it's just, you know, a safe place to be. What do you do if you're not going to spend your runes on Mara Rend? What happens in a situation like this where I've got 9 and 27 seconds on the buff? I don't need to refresh Bone Shield. What do? Well, then we're going to switch into Heart Strike, right? So Heart Strike costs 1 rune. It's an instant attack that will strike my target and one other nearby enemy, doing about 4,500 physical damage to both of them. It will also reduce their movement speed by 20% for 8 seconds, and it will generate a bonus 5 runic power. So if I just very quickly spend runic power, you can see there it generates 15. Right, 10 for spending the rune, and then a bonus 5. So it's a very good bonus, actually. It's a very good bonus. And that's the very basic core, and then tying into that, the runic power. This is the other major part of our active mitigation. Death Strike. This costs by default 45 runic power. You focus Dark Power into a strike that does 1,284 physical damage, so it hits very, very hard, and heals you for up to 30% of all damage that you took in the last 5 seconds. This will heal you for a minimum of 10% of your maximum health. So this is, you know, the Blood Death Knight is quite different from a lot of other tanks in that it's quite reactive to damage. What you want to do is you want to, well, obviously ensure that you've got your Bone Shield rolling at all times, right? But then you can also bank up runic power when you know that there's going to be hard hits from the boss coming in, and then you respond to that with your Death Strikes, and you can heal up for the damage that was dealt to you in the last little chunk of time to get extra value out of that. So that's a big thing right there. One important thing, just to mention right there, because you just saw me do 3 Death Strikes in a row, there is a talent ossuary, which ties into the 5 Bone Shield thing I mentioned, which when you have 5 Bone Shield charges, that reduces the cost of Death Strike by 5 runic power, which doesn't seem that strong initially, but seeing as we have 125 maximum, it means that if Death Strike only costs 40 runic power, with this talent, then with 125 max runic power, I can bank it up and I can do 3 in a row to survive like really dangerous situations. So that is quite important for some active mitigation, and this talent has been very dominant. They have buffed some of the other ones, and this is new. We'll come back to that in the what's new section, though. A couple of other bits then for AoE that also tie into this core rotation. Blood Boil is a very important part. This is probably your biggest damage dealer in AoE. So this has around about a 7-second recharge affected by your haste. It has 2 charges. It's instant cast. Bam. It's going to do 460 shadow damage, so not affected by armor, to all enemies within 10 yards. And it also infects them with a Blood Plague, which is going to drain about 900 health from the target to you over 24 seconds. So it's not a massive amount of healing, right? Your Death Strike is by far the biggest chunk of healing that you're going to get, but it is a nice little bit of trickle healing, trickle damage, and this is going to be, again, the main source of your AoE, and just, yeah, keeping a bit of extra threat on guys. You can see that Blood Plague affecting him right there. Quite easy to keep Blood Plague up. Blood Boil has no rune cost, no runic power cost, so you sort of weave this in. You kind of try to keep the charges rolling at all times and weave it in. You can see this proc popping up as well. This is our Crimson Scourge. I'll touch on this very fast. It's the only proc, actually, the only major sort of passive that you have here. Apart from your Mastery. Your Mastery, by the way, is a shield. Whenever you Death Strike, you will gain a shield for a percentage based off your Mastery stat for the amount that you did. So, cool. You're going to get a bit of a shield whenever you Death Strike. And the better you use your Death Strikes, the more you get healed. The bigger your shield is, the better off you are. Crimson Scourge is whenever I auto-attack targets with my Blood Plague on them, which is that health draining plague. There is a chance that my next Death and Decay will cost no runes and it will reset the cooldown. What is Death and Decay then? Well, Death and Decay. Bam, let me pop it down here. This is, again, another big part of our AoE rotation. You throw this thing down, you corrupt the targeted ground, doing about 600 shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets within the area. And while you are in the area, your Heart Strike will hit up to 0 additional targets. I believe that is a tooltip error. I believe it should be like it should hit like, I think it's 4 or 5. I can't remember now. Targets total. Anyway, this is a tooltip error. You can check for yourself when it's fixed. But yeah, our Heart Strike's going to hit more enemies, which is really nice. So that's going to help our AoE. So again, we're going to always basically keep Death and Decay rolling. Just always have that down. It's a great source of AoE damage and powering up our Heart Strike even more. And yeah, honestly, that's most of the core parts of the rotation. There are a couple of new bits now, which are these 2 things right here, which are coming in Shadowlands, which I'll touch on more in the What's New section. But you do have Blood Tap, which is a 1-minute recharge to instantly generate a rune, which is cool. And whenever your Bone Shield charges are consumed, you reduce the cooldown here a bit. So that's extra runes coming in. And then you have Rune Tap. So that's Blood Tap and then Rune Tap, which is a 25-second recharge. Costs 1 rune. And this reduces all the damage you take by 20% for 4 seconds. So quite a minor defensive buff, but nonetheless, it's going to be an important one. So you're sort of going to be weaving your 2 taps into your core rotation as well. And we also have some other talents here and things like that. Let's touch on some core defensives and other things as well that are going to be an important part of your kit. Again, bear in mind that not every ability here is brand new, is old, so I'll cover them in the What's New section. But you have Death's Caress here, which costs 1 rune, and this is, it's going to do a light amount of damage, shadow damage, and put Blood Plague. You're going to use this to pull enemies at range. I do have a talent called Blood Drinker, which is very cool. This is at level 1. This is a very popular talent, sorry, level 15, the first tier of your talent tree. This is a channeled ability for 1 rune that does a big chunk of damage. As you can see, we're going to drain 2,700 health from the target over 2.8 seconds, and you can still move, parry, dodge, and use defensives when you're channeling the ability. So this is a pretty commonly taken one, very iconic, so I just thought I'd point it out very quickly. In terms of defensive cooldowns, we have some very big ones, of course, as the Blood DK, and also worth mentioning, we do have just a standard 15, well, it's actually a little bit longer than standard, 15-yard range kick, right? So your defensives, well, your main sort of Blood DK one is Vampiric Blood. Hey, we love blood. What do you know? 1.5 minute cooldown. You're going to get 30% more maximum health and increase all healing and absorbs received by 30% for 12 seconds. So your healers will heal you more. Obviously, your Death Strike will heal you more. Your Death Shield becomes stronger and all of that. So that's sort of one of your main defensives. Much like the other Death Knights, you still have Anti-Magic Shell, which is a 5-second magic absorb shield for 11,000. It's a bit stronger for Blood DK than the other Death Knights. And this also prevents dots being applied to you, so certain harmful magical effects. So you can really use this for do some cool stuff and immune some interesting mechanics, such as, for example, Evoke Anguish on Azoth, if you played that one. Icebound Fortitude is still there. 3-minute cooldown, makes you immune to stun effects and reduces all damage you take by 30% for 8 seconds. So not the craziest defensive in the world, but still quite nice. And obviously being immune to stuns is pretty cool. This is the Vampiric Blood effect. Very nice. The rune weapon is slightly different for the Blood DK compared to the DPS specs for Death Knight. 2-minute cooldown. Summon a rune weapon for 8 seconds that mirrors your melee attacks and bolsters your defenses. While active, you gain 40% parry chance. For the most part, you use this as a damage cooldown, really. One nice thing that it does, though, is that, for example, if I pop this rune weapon, you'll see if I do a Marrow Rend, he'll also do a Marrow Rend, and it actually builds me up straight up to 6 stacks, which is pretty cool. So that's very, very nice. So you can definitely use that to get some quick stacks on your bone shield going into a fight, which is kind of nifty for the dancing rune weapon right there. You obviously have a taunt. Very iconic Death Knight ability. We have our Death Grip, of course, 15-second cooldown. You can, again, it won't work on a target dummy, but you grip an enemy to you. You have the Super Uber Grip, of course, as the Death Knight, as well the Blood Death Knight in Gorefiend's Grasp, which is a 2-minute cooldown. This will coil around all enemies within 15 yards of a hostile or friendly target. So I can, for example, I could cast this on myself. I could cast this on one of these guys. It won't really do anything right now because they're target dummies, but it will pull everything within 15 yards onto that. Every hostile target within 15 yards that can be pulled will be pulled. So this is amazing to stack things up, which is awesome. And yeah, then, another thing. Movement ability, Death's Advance. This is your only real baseline movement ability. 45-second cooldown, 10 seconds of 35% move speed. While it's active, you can't be reduced below 100% normal move speed. And passively, just all the time, you can't be slowed below 70% of your normal speed. And yeah, then there's another few little bits here that are new, though. Let me see. Okay, you can always, Deathgate back to Ebb and Hold if you want to. And you also have Path of Frost, where for 1 rune you can let your raid, yourself, your party, whatever, walk on water, which is kind of nice. Yeah, I think that's it. All right, so there you go. That's the core sort of stuff for the Blood DK. Again, broadly speaking, we're going to maintain our Blood Plague on the targets. We're going to maintain at least 6 stacks of this. We'll keep Death and Decay rolling. We'll try to keep Blood Boil rolling. And yeah, we'll sort of bank up our runic power for difficult situations. And now we have in Shadowlands these taps that we can use, so we can keep our blood tap rolling for a bit of extra value there too, which is kind of nice. We can pop our rune tap if we're going into some pretty big dangerous situations, and then we can use our death strikes to heal ourselves up. And that is that's most of the gameplay. Pretty cool. So again, reactive, very reactive. Make sure you have runic power ready to heal yourself. Be aware of the damage you're going to take, and then healing that damage back with Death Strike means that your health bar is a little more bouncy than other tanks, but you do have a lot of self-sufficiency with that healing. That's the Blood DK. Alright guys, well, what's new for the Blood DK in Shadowlands? There's actually quite a lot of stuff here that's new. The first thing I want to dive into is rune forging. This has seen a massive expansion in this expansion, which is fantastic. The first one here, this first new rune, the Rune of Hysteria, is actually very nice for the Blood DK. Affixes your rune weapon with a rune that increases maximum runic power by 20, and your attacks have a chance to increase runic power generation by 20% for 8 seconds. So, obviously, our runic power fuels our Death Strike, which is our, our main source of survivability and of self-healing. So this is potentially a very strong rune for us in a lot of circumstances. So that is one to keep an eye on. The Rune of Razor Ice is still there. That's for Frost DKs. Rune of Sanguination. This one is very intriguing. Affixes your rune weapon with a rune that causes your Death Strike to deal increased damage based on the target's missing health, and when you fall below 35% health, you heal for 48% of your maximum health over 8 seconds. So this adds a sort of execute mechanic to Death Strike, and obviously also gives you a little bit of that, emergency healing when you drop low on life. So this one could also, again, turn out to be very, very good for Blood DK, especially in those single target situations. If you imagine like a difficult boss with a long boss burn at the end of the fight, in a raid, for example, this could be very, very strong to get that extra execute damage, and also, again, a bit of extra survivability for you. Remember, Death Strike does do quite a bit of damage, so that's quite an intriguing one. Another intriguing one, in case we're in some heavy magic damage situations, is the Rune of Spell Warding. Affixes your rune weapon with a rune that deflects 3% of all spell damage, and has a chance to create a shield that absorbs magic damage equal to 10% of your maximum health. When an enemy damages the shield, their cast speed is reduced by 10% for 6 seconds. So it's not a massive deal. You know, this is definitely, I thought this would be very cool for like Frost Death Knights as an offhand enchant in some arena matchups and rated battlegrounds, that sort of thing. For Blood DK, this could see some use again if you're in a very, very heavy spell damage situation with lots of spellcasters. This could be good, something to keep an eye on. Remember, the Apocalypse, I don't think we'll see much use apart from Unholy Death Knights. But anyway, it's a new one, so this is what it does. It will give your ghouls attacks a chance to apply one of the following debuffs to the target: Death, healing reduction; War, increases damage taken from the Death Knight; Famine, reduces damage dealt to the Death Knight; and Pestilence, which slows the target and does damage over time. So the Unholy Death Knight obviously has a ghoul up all of the time, so this could be really cool for them, especially I think in PvP with, you know, that healing reduction. That's pretty nifty. So that's one for them more so than anyone else. Reign of the Fallen Crusader I think is still pretty okay for Blood DK. Chance to heal you for 6% max health and increase your total strength by 15% for 15 seconds. Not terrible. Stone Skin Gargoyle is still there, which increases armor by 5% and all stats by 5%. And then a new one, which is really for leveling, I think, though may see some use in some Mythic Plus, perhaps. It's possible, but mostly leveling, which is going to give you 10% haste and movement speed and heal you for 5% max health whenever you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor, and also increases movement speed while dead by 10%. So, yeah, you see what I mean. It's leveling sort of open world stuff. I'd say like the main ones, certainly that you're going to be using most of the time. I expect Hysteria is going to be a pretty big one, a pretty big new one here. Sanguination could see some big use. And then like your old classics in Fallen Crusader, Stone Skin Gargoyle are still going to be the old reliable. So yeah, those new Runeforge is definitely adding a lot of flavor, a lot of options here for the Death Knights. And those are available to all specs. So yeah, cool. You can think about how they will affect your Blood DK. Okay, before we dive into some of the sort of big new abilities that are kind of like these flashy extra unpruning things, I do want to touch on two new abilities that are coming that are going to form a very big part of your core tanking rotation for Blood DK to sort of spice that up, which is interesting. So first of all, we have Blood Tap. This has 2 charges and a 1-minute recharge. Consume the essence around you to generate 1 rune. The recharge time is also reduced by 2 seconds whenever a Bone Shield charge is consumed. And as you can see, if I do an ability, this is off of the global cooldown, right? So you can use this to generate more runes, which is kind of nice. You're gonna, I think generally speaking, you probably keep one of these rolling, or you could save them up for some sort of dangerous situations where you want to get more runes quickly, and therefore generate more runic power in a pinch. The other tap here is Rune Tap, and this is another sort of emergency in a pinch button that you can press. This costs 1 rune. Its instant cast has a 25-second recharge and has 2 charges, and this reduces all damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds. So this is certainly nice to have this sort of extra little bit of a defensive, which otherwise, you know, Blood DK does quite lack. You know, you're quite reliant on self-healing. This gives you, you know, a little bit of on-demand damage reduction, though it's obviously 20% is quite small, and 4 seconds is a very short period of time, but this could help you deal with some of those bigger hits that would otherwise threaten you. And once again, you can see that this is not on the global cooldown, though it does have its own cooldown. Looks like it doesn't like refresh the buff or anything, it reapplies the buff at its original duration, so you wouldn't want to stack those up. But yeah, kind of cool. So these 2 different taps, you know, a bit of a bartender, like a vampiric bartender just pouring out different types of blood. But yeah, these 2 blood taps, the Blood Tap and Rune Tap, they're going to form a big part of your core rotation, I think, in the Shadowlands. So interesting additions there. Two different taps. If those 2 sort of, you know, fairly basic core rotation things weren't quite your style, well, their good news is there are some big flashy things for the Blood DK in Shadowlands as well. Let's cover maybe the flashiest one first, Anti-Magic Zone. A 2-minute cooldown, place an Anti-Magic Zone for 10 seconds that reduces spell damage taken by party or raid members by 20%. Bam, we slap this bad boy down. How freaking awesome is this? It's a bit like, you know, a Disc Priest Barrier. This is going to be absolutely amazing on some raid fights, absolutely amazing on some dungeon fights. I don't know if Blood DK is used much in PvP, but if it is, it's going to be great for that as well. Slap it on your healers, help them stay alive. Yeah, very, very cool. Awesome bit of raid utility. Again, it's quite like, you know, Havoc Demon Hunters bringing Darkness, or Warriors bringing Rallying Cry. The Death Knights are getting in on that action with Anti-Magic Zone. So that is awesome. And raid leaders around the world are going to be eyeing this one up for sure when planning out defensives for the raid. So that is super duper cool. A little bit of a more minor thing here, but Chains of Ice is actually coming to the Blood DK as well, which costs 1 rune. Bam. And this will actually reduce the target's movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds. So this is quite spammable. If you're going up against, you know, 1 or 2 tough mobs in Mythic Plus or whatever, this will definitely help you kiting them. It's very simple, you know, point and click, chains of ice, 70% slow for 8 seconds. Awesome. So cool for some of your kiting needs. That doesn't do any damage though. Another intriguing one here is Lichborn. A 2-minute cooldown. Draw upon unholy energy to become undead for 10 seconds, increasing leech by 10% and making you immune to charm, fear, and sleep. So there's like a very minor, you know, the leech is kind of nice. It's a mild bit of self-healing, not a big deal. This is mostly a 2-minute cooldown immunity to charm, fears, and sleeps, which, again, in certain situations is going to be awesome. Whenever those are around in a fight, this could be pretty good. You could immune certain mechanics. So kind of a nice little bonus cooldown. And, of course, this makes you undead. And another ability that we now have is Death Coil, which costs 40 runic power, fires a blast of unholy energy at the target. This has a 30-yard range. It will do 770 shadow damage to an enemy, or will heal an undead ally for 3,156. So this is pretty nice because in situations, let's say that, you know, I'm fighting a boss, I've got lots of runic power built up. I'm ready to heal myself, but oh no, there's gigantic explosion of death and destruction and doom around the Stalwart Guardian, and I have to run away. Hey, pretty nice. I have the option at least now. I can pop Lichborn, and I can heal myself with Death Coil, right? And each one I can heal myself for 3,000. Kind of nifty. It's just like a fun extra thing. I mean, I've got about 36,000 life right now at this current level, so it's not a ton of healing by any means. But it's just nice to have that little option there. Or again, just do a little bit of damage at range with runic power. It's more, I feel like it's more of a thing if you're going to overcap runic power and you can't actually get in range to Death Strike. But it's an intriguing one. It's there, so you can do what you will with it. Something that vaguely ties into that as well is Raise Dead. So you could also heal your ghoul, though I don't think you particularly would that often. But Raise Dead is a new spell, 2-minute cooldown. Raises a ghoul to fight by your side. He'll last for 1 minute. And this is awesome. It's just like a little bit of extra damage, but yeah. Come on. There you go. Yeah. You show that Stalwart Guardian who's boss. So now you're going to have a little ghoul friend. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a name. He's just called, you know, Risen Ghoul. But, you know, he's kind of nifty. It's a bit of flavor. And I think it's a really fun bit of flavor. Very Death Knight-esque. And if you like that flavor, you're certainly going to like this next ability, which is Sacrificial Pact. For 20 runic power, you can sacrifice your ghoul, who will do 1,152 shadow damage to 8 nearby enemies, and heal you for 25% of your maximum health. So your little ghoul buddy, who will, you know, loyally follow you around for about 1 minute. You can kind of plan this out in Mythic Plus, or pop it as an emergency thing either. But you can then sacrifice your buddy. He will explode. 25% max health heal, so a nice little bonus defensive, quite pleasant. And then also a nice little chunk of damage again, like Blood Boil, for example, is doing 461 in AoE. Well, this guy is going to do 1,152. So kind of like almost not quite 3, sort of like 2.5 Blood Boils worth of damage to 8 nearby enemies. Pretty good. It does cost 20 runic power. But I think this still could be a fun and decent option. So there you go. A little bit of fun. A little bit of fun and flavor for the Blood DK. There's also a few leveling perks and a couple of balancing tweaks. One of the big balancing tweaks is they have upped the armor. They have upped the armor of your Bone Shield, which is really nice. So Bone Shield is essentially a 50% armor increase right now. So no Bone Shield, I have 20% damage reduction. With Bone Shield, 30% damage reduction. So they just slightly upped the coefficient on that, which is nice. They nerfed it in BFA, which was pretty rough. So I think they just reverted the nerf from like 40% armor to 50%. So pretty cool. And then you also have a few leveling perks during Shadowlands. The first one is relatively boring. It's Heartstrike rank 3, which makes Heartstrike do 20% more damage. So kind of cool. Not too interesting. There is Vamp Blood rank 2. So Vamp Blood is now going to increase your max health by 30% and increase all healing and absorption by 35%, and now lasts 2 seconds longer. So it's going to last for 12 seconds instead of 10. So a little bit of a perk to Vamp Blood, which is quite nice, certainly welcome. And then finally, Death's Advance very similarly had a slight buff too. There's another, I think, rank 2 for Death's Advance that you get, I think, at level 49. So you'll actually get this in the pre-patch just straight away. You don't need to level up for Shadowlands in this, but it's there and it's cool. So Death's Advance will now give you 35% movement speed, and it lasts for 10 seconds. So an extra 5%, an extra 2 seconds, much like Vamp Blood. 5% bonus, 2 seconds longer for both of them. So quite cool. looking at the talents then, and there's been certainly a little bit of a reshuffle here and an attempt to rebalance some of these talents to give you some other interesting options. So let me walk you through some of these major changes. The first major change I want to point out is Tombstone has now moved to the level 15 tier. This is a 1 minute cooldown, consume up to 5 bone shield charges. For each charge consumed, you gain 6 runic power, so maximum 30, and absorb damage equal to 6% of your maximum health for 8 seconds. Again, with those 5 charges, that's 30% max health shield. So certainly an interesting one on a 1 minute cooldown. Of course, that does share a tier with Blood Drinker, which is a really good damage source, and obviously gives you some nice healing as well, or Heartbreaker there. So interesting options on the whole. They're certainly trying to rebalance that tier. I still lean towards Blood Drinker for the most part myself for that nice single target flexible cooldown, but perhaps these ones will be a bit better. Rapid Decomposition then at level 25. So that makes your Blood Plague and Death and Decay do damage 15% more often. Pretty nice. But it also makes your Blood Plague leech 50% more health. So I think that was added in. So an extra little bit of scaling, a bit of extra incentive to take this one. And yeah, I think Consumption might have a target cap. It does do 150% healing from the damage you deal now. So that was buffed up. It was just healing you for 100% of the damage you dealt. Now it's 150%. So that is a bigger and more noticeable heal, which is quite cool. Again, going in the theme of new talents to mix it up. Obviously, level 30 is a pretty problematic talent here because Ossuary is so good. May not be as essential if you're running with the Rune of Hysteria, or perhaps it'll be more essential running with Rune of Hysteria. You guys can theorycraft and let me know, Blood DK experts. But we now have Relish in Blood is here. I believe that Tombstone was there before. But this is a new talent. While Crimson Scourge is active, your next Death and Decay heals you for 286 health per bone shield charge, and immediately you will gain 10 runic power. So that one I think could be pretty nice, depending on how frequently Crimson Scourge procs, and assuming we have at least 5 charges of bone shield quite frequently. Again, it's kind of like Ossuary, and this one, these are now all are incentivizing you to have high stacks of bone shield. Let's say we have let's say we have 6. It's going to heal me for, 6 or 7. It's going to heal me for about 1,500. Kind of nice. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. And yeah, give 10 runic power. That's also a nice little benefit. So pretty good there. Again, we'll see how this ends up working. Will Ossuary remain the de facto go-to, or will this mix it up? I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet. Level 35 also saw a bit of a mix-up. So we have Will of the Necropolis, which I think is still the same as it was at the end of BFA. Anti-Magic Barrier has been buffed. This now reduces the cooldown of Anti-Magic Shell by 20 seconds, so from 1 minute to 40 seconds, and increases the duration and amount absorbed by 40%, so that's quite nice. And then Mark of Blood has been moved here from, I believe, level 45, and this has been really buffed up a lot. This used to have a 30 runic power cost. That's gone. It's now free, which is awesome. So this has a 6-second cooldown, 15-yard range. Place a Mark of Blood on an enemy for 15 seconds. The enemy's damaging auto attacks will also heal their victim for 3% of the victim's maximum health. So this is pretty cool. And again, I could just keep this up all the time. Like, no big deal. No stress. I could just switch the target every 6 seconds. So this one I think is really awesome. Really awesome. In fact, you can see I get it up on multiple targets. In fact, I didn't realize that. You can actually have it up on multiple targets. So you could multi-dot with this thing, potentially keep it up on 2 targets, and sometimes the third one. Pretty nice, right? Pretty nice. So this could certainly come and be a more consistent source of healing. It's really the removal of the runic power cost, which was the big thing that prevented this from being too good, because you're giving up death strikes to do this, and it's just difficult to work into your rotation. Now it's very easy to do, and even in a raid situation when you are now off tanking and the other tank is actively main tanking, you can keep that Mark of Blood on the boss and whatever adds he's tanking, and just deliver more healing to that tank, which is pretty cool. So Mark of Blood could really start to become a standout one, compared to obviously Will of the Necropolis, which is sort of the go-to in BFA, which is only doing something when you're below 30% health. So yeah, a very interesting option there. Level 40 I believe is still the same. Level 45, Voracious has been buffed. Death Strike's healing is increased by 20% now, and it gives you 15% leech for 8 seconds whenever you Death Strike. So this obviously is fantastic. Lots more healing with Death Strike now, which is awesome, and the leech is still pretty good. Death Pact is also now on this row, coming from the other Death Knight specs, and probably returning for Blood. I assume it was part of Blood in previous expansions. 2-minute cooldown. Create a Death Pact that heals you for 50% of your maximum health, but absorbs incoming healing equal to 30% of your max health for 15 seconds. So this is like a, a big emergency cooldown. I feel like this one doesn't look too good right now. Like, it's okay, but I'd honestly probably rather just have 20% more healing from Death Strike and just a very, very constant level of leech running all the time. This one seems like not that powerful for quite a hefty cooldown. Or then obviously you still have Bloodworms going, which, do a little bit of damage. And, they do give you a burst of healing when you drop below half health. So, Bloodworms is still a good option. It's the only thing that increases your damage. So an interesting tier, and I expect, they may tune up Death Pact for Blood DK, make it a bit more appealing. We should have to see. And then at level 50, they have also buffed Red Thirst. This used to give you 1 second of cooldown reduction on Vamp Blood. This now gives you 1.5 seconds of cooldown reduction per 10 runic power spent on Vampiric Blood. So a little bit of a buff there. And again, competing with Purgatory, the Cheat Death effect, or Bone Storm for a bit of AoE. So yeah, there you are, guys. That is sort of the revamped talent tree for Blood DK. I am not an expert on Blood DK at all, but from my initial impressions here, it seems like they've been trying to do a pretty interesting job, really buffing up some of these underperforming talents like Mark of Blood, Rapid Decomposition, which as far as I know, Tombstone may be moving its tier. They were very, very rarely taken or consumption. So it might be nice. Again, you could have a lot more options here for specific fights, and this could shake up your talent tree. So there you go. Well, guys, let us take a look at maybe the most exciting thing to come in Shadowlands. And of course, they are the Covenant abilities. So we're going to check out the Kyrian one first right here. For the Kyrians, their signature ability is Summon Steward. You summon in your little buddy here. He's going to give you a Phial of Serenity. And this is like a Healthstone, basically, right? So it has 3 charges. You can use 1 per combat encounter. It restores 15% health and removes all diseases, poisons, curses, and bleeds affecting you. So anytime you're tanking, like if you imagine King's Rest back in BFA, this would be a really pleasant buff whenever any of those things are there. And in Shadowlands, they are trying to put a lot of those effects into dungeons and raids and things like that to make this feel good. So it's going to be a solid defensive ability. Then the Covenant ability for DK is not the most interesting in the world. It's Shackle the Unworthy. It's a 1-minute cooldown. Admonish your target for their past transgressions, reducing the damage they deal to you by 5% and dealing 3,300 arcane damage over 14 seconds. While it is active on an enemy, rune spending attacks reduce its cooldown by 4 seconds. So to give you a brief idea, I mean, let's put our Blood Boil on, and okay, let's Shackle the Unworthy. Now let's build up like our stacks here. Let's Blood Drinker, and let's just see how low we can get this cooldown in the course of this dot. Let's get another one of these down. We'll get our Death and Decay down. Why not? Here we go. Get another stack here. Guess we'll do a Death Strike, and you can see that the cooldown is actually quite low, right? You're going to get pretty good uptime on this. It's not 100% uptime, at least not with this level of haste, though maybe later in the expansion this will be 100% uptime. So quite consistent and good uptime, though, on that damage reduction. And it's going to do a solid chunk of damage, too. You're not going to complain about this too much, I don't think. It's a nice chunk of damage, which is cool. It's just relatively uninteresting, I think, in terms of gameplay. Also, it is purely single target unless you use a Conduit. And you have a limited amount of slots for your Conduit, so make this decision at your peril, I suppose. But good news is that if you want this to be AoE, it can be. Proliferation is the Kyrian Potency Conduit. Shackle the Unworthy has a 100% chance to spread to a nearby enemy each time it deals damage. Now, the ranks here that we have are quite weird, so I don't know what this actually means. These numbers could be quite placeholder, but the main takeaway here is that you will be able to use a Conduit to make this work for AoE. All the other DK Covenants are AoE. So it would feel pretty bad if this was pure single target. It would feel pretty rubbish in dungeons. Not too good. But you can make it work for AoE. It just costs you a Conduit. So I'd say the Kyrian one is okay. It's not terrible. It's just not the most exciting thing in the world. Now, here's one that is much more interesting. This is the Night Fae. Yes, the Sparkly Fairies. Their signature ability is Soul Shape, where, with a 1.5 minute cooldown, I can activate this to turn into a Vulpin instantly, teleporting 15 yards forward. And then I can reactivate it. Becomes this button Flicker to teleport again. And this has a 4-second cooldown. This buff lasts for 12 seconds. In a rest area, as you can see, this lasts indefinitely. But yeah, 1.5 minute cooldown. Turn into a Vulpin. Do the little teleport. Get 50% movement speed. And you can reactivate it to teleport several times. This is pretty awesome for a Death Knight who's quite a slow spec. So nice big mobility cooldown is very, very cool. And then the Covenant ability for Death Knights is called Death's Due, which actually replaces and improves your Death and Decay. So It's going to do, I believe, the same amount of damage as Death and Decay, but the crucial thing that this does is that enemies that you damage with this will do 1% reduced damage to you, and this stacks every time they take damage up to a maximum of 15% damage reduction. And it also is going to buff your strength, proportionate to how much this is going to do. So it's not going to work on these target dummies, unfortunately, and it didn't work in the dungeon that I have the footage of for you in this video. But this one I think looks really, really good. Obviously, as a Blood DK, you have the Crimson Scourge, where your auto attacks are going to give you a chance to reset your Death and Decay. You know, even by default, this is a 10-second ground effect with a 15-second cooldown. You're going to have really good uptime on this, almost constant uptime on this. So it's constantly going to be reducing the damage enemies are going to do to you. It's going to constantly buff your strength. You're going to be able to stack this up on single target bosses. You're going to be able to stack this up in AoE. So I think this one looks phenomenal, actually. This one looks really, really good as just a very, very constant source of damage reduction, and also, you know, more strength, which means more damage, and so on, more self-healing, more and all that good stuff. So yeah, I think this one is pretty good for the Blood DK. The potency conduit, if you want to grab it, is called Withering Ground. It makes deaths do to 15% increased damage. That actually goes up to 50% increased damage. So, you know, it doesn't do a ton of damage. So this may not be like a high priority conduit by any means, but again, you know, tuning could always happen. It could always go up. Just know that right now, the conduit that you can grab for this just makes your Death and Decay essentially do more damage. Kind of nice. For the Venthyr then, for the Venthyr, their signature ability is one I'm sure you've heard of. It's Door of Shadows. 1 minute cooldown, 1.5 second cast time, and 35-yard range. This is essentially a point and click teleport. I want to come over here and hang out with, spoilers, oh god. Lore spoilers, but yeah, as you can see, point and click teleport, very, very nice. Lots and lots of uses for this, from Mythic Plus skips to getting over mechanics, or just, you know what, just getting around the fights a little bit faster. Pretty good. The Covenant ability then is Swarming Mists. This has a 1 rune cost and a 1 minute cooldown. A heavy mist surrounds you for 8 seconds, increasing your dodge by 10%. It also does 300 shadow damage every second to enemies within 10 yards, and every time it does damage, you gain 3 runic power up to a maximum 15 runic power. Now, if I pop this, for example, against these guys, you see number 1 has a very cool effect, very appropriate for a Blood Death Knight, but every time this is ticking, I'm gaining 6 runic power, because it's hitting 2 enemies. So obviously, if you're hitting like 5 enemies, that's when you're going to get the 15 runic power every single second. So number 1, you know, defensively, 10% dodge, not very reliable by any means, but still, I guess it will, on average, add up to a little bit of a survivability increase. And, you know, at the very least, that's a solid chunk of AoE damage. You could see, you know, against 2 targets right there, it's going to hit them each for about 3,000 damage. You know, it did a very good chunk of AoE, and it's on a short 1 minute cooldown. And then also generating all that runic power is pretty fantastic, right? That's going to help you fuel your death strikes, fuel survivability. So I think this one is a good and very, very solid looking option for the Blood DK. And it gets a lot better with the potency conduit, indeed, called Impenetrable Gloom, where Swarming Mist damage and dodge chance is going to be increased by 5% for the first 4 seconds, so the first half of the cast, or half of the ability. That actually goes up to 30%. 30%. So with the max rank of this conduit, for the first 4 seconds of your Swarming Mist, you're actually going to have a 40% dodge chance, which is pretty cool, and it's going to do an extra chunk of damage, so it could be very nice for grabbing threats on a new pack of mobs in Mythic Plus. You know, you're doing a big AoE pull, a dangerous pull. This is going to give you a chunk of dodge to help you survive those first few seconds, which is important. Blood DK has a glaring weakness where, well, hey, guess what? I want to get my bone shield up. I need to go in and hit something with Marrowrend. So, you know, you can take a couple of melee hits in that first second. That can really rip your health apart when you don't have that extra 50% armor. It's pretty rough, right? And you obviously are going to go into the fight with very low runic power. So this gives you some upfront survivability, especially with that conduit, which I think makes it really attractive, and obviously do more damage, help you establish more threats. So Swarming Mist, I'm a pretty massive fan of that for Blood DK. And then finally we have the Necrolords. Could this be even cooler? Well, I think probably yes, it can be. Fleshcraft is their signature ability. 2-minute cooldown. You channel for 4 seconds, form a shield for 20% maximum health. This is, I think, pretty dreadful in combat. You cannot, unlike Blood Drinker, which is a unique channel where you can, you know, parry and dodge and use defensive abilities, you cannot with Fleshcraft. So this is something that you will use when you're not actively tanking mobs. You could certainly use it before pulling a pack of mobs in Mythic Plus, and that could be pretty good. When you channel it near corpses, you claim their essence. The shield can go up to 50% of your maximum health, which is, you know, it's a pretty big shield, pretty decent. But again, to reiterate, this is not something you would use in combat while actively tanking, like unless the boss is stopping to cast something, or, you know, you can go and do a soak or some other mechanic happens. So yeah, just bear that in mind. The Covenant ability, though, is mega cool. 2-minute cooldown, Abomination Limb, sprout an additional limb for 12 seconds. Every 1 second, it does 346 shadow damage to all nearby enemies, and pulls an enemy to your location if they are further than 8 yards from you. So this is going to be insane in PvP. See, this is the pull effect going off right here. But yeah, how freaking amazing is this? So, you know, it's a big cooldown, 2-minute cooldown, but this is going to do an absolute... it's a truckload. This is a lot of AoE damage, a big AoE burst cooldown on that 2 minutes, which is awesome for those 12 seconds. Lots of damage, and the utility is fantastic of grabbing enemies in. So cool. I mean, one of the big reasons that you see Blood DK's pick, like in raids, and one of the coolest things, of course, you bring to Mythic Plus scenarios is your Death Grips, your Gore Fiend's Grasp. Well, here is a third gripping ability for you. It's the Abomination Limb. I think that is super
badass.
Again, like the damage in comparison, it's like 12 seconds, doing 340 every tick, compared to the Venthyr, which is 300 damage for 8 seconds. So 300 times 8 versus 350 times 12. You guys can work it out. I believe that Swarming Mist does more damage, like over the entire fight, but the Abomination Limb is more upfront burst damage and has the extra utility. So, you know, whereas that has the defensive benefit. So it's an interesting choice right there, I have to say. The potency conduit for this one is a bit situational. It's called Brutal Grasp. It's going to do 50% increased damage to enemies it pulls to you, and that has those multiple ranks. I think this is a bit more useful as a tank. Like, you could do some like kiting strategies or something like that. Like if you're fighting caster mobs, you could sort of kite around and keep you know, for those 12 seconds, keep like kiting around and re-gripping these caster mobs to interrupt their casts and do lots of damage to them. So I think it's quite interesting. That's an option that's available to use the tank, because you can obviously move all the mobs easily in a dungeon that is not anywhere near as available to, like, your, you know, if you're an unholy DK, like, you're not going to be able to just run around. Well, you could, but you're going to lose a lot of damage because you're not going to be actually connecting with mobs to physically attack them. So yeah, this one's pretty exciting. And there you are, guys. Honestly, I think the Blood DK has some very, very attractive choices on the whole for Covenants. All of these are good in their own way. You have the Necrolords, who bring you a big AoE damage burst cooldown with awesome utility of an extra, like, gripping effect every second. So cool. You have the Venthyr, who give you that short cooldown, 1 minute AoE burst cooldown, which also provides you with a little bit of survivability and an awful lot of runic power in AoE. You have the Night Fae, who are going to provide you with Death's Due, that just upgrade to your death and decay, just giving you a constant and smooth level of damage reduction, and also bonus strength for some bonus damage, so a very consistent level of damage. And then you have the Kyrian, probably the least interesting one, which is just, you know, a big single target dot on a very, very short cooldown. That is also, you know, you can spread it in AoE with a conduit, and also does a bit of damage reduction. So a good single target option, and you can make it work in AoE with a conduit. So yeah, I think lots of interesting choices on the whole. It's going to be a tough decision as a Death Knight to pick your Covenant. The next thing I want to look at here are the Legendaries then. So there are 4 that are for all Death Knight specs, and then there are 4 that are specific for the Blood Death Knight. Let's look at the generic ones first. So we have this one here, which is called Death's Embrace. This increases the duration of anti-magic shell by 100%, and any damage it absorbs heals you. So, I mean, maybe could see some very niche use on some magic fights, but this doesn't jump out as being all that useful for a Blood DK. You know, if you are going to take magic damage, that shield's going to be shredded off pretty quick. We'll see, though. Then, the next one here is Grip of the Everlasting. For 3 seconds after casting Death Grip, you may cast the spell a second time without regard for its cooldown. Again, may see some niche uses in some PvE situations. I feel like this is more of a PvP thing, and I don't know if you're going to play Blood DK that often in PvP. again, we'll see, but this seems quite situational, but that's a good thing, I think, for a legendary. If it's, situational legendaries, I think can be quite good. This one is actually what I used in the dungeon and found this really, really cool. This one is called Pheromones. It's kind of funny, but this gives you and your minions, so, your raised dead guy, 10% haste while you're inside your death and decay. Quite nice. But even more importantly, enemies damaged by your death and decay have a chance to cower in place for 3 seconds. I believe this was an old talent, right? An old talent that was, I think, quite good, if I remember rightly. But this has come back, so, I mean, this is just awesome, right? Your death and decay, you have nearly 100% of the time as a Blood Death Knight, and that death and decay going down in the dungeon is just going to constantly be disrupting enemies. It's going to break spell casts, it's going to break ability casts, it's also going to just CC them a little bit so they're not hitting you as much. So I think this one looks amazing. Like I said, this is what I grabbed for the dungeon runs because I thought, hey, this looks like it's going to be really damn good, and it does proc a lot. So yeah, very impressed by this one. This seems super powerful. And then the final generic one is called Super Strain. Your Frost Fever, well, for us, it's our Blood Plague, is also going to apply Frost Fever and Virulent Plague as well. So they are the diseases for the Frost DK and the Unholy DK. So the Virulent Plague, I believe, will do some AoE damage when the target that has it dies, so that's fine. And Frost Fever is more interesting, though, because Frost Fever generates runic power whenever it does damage, so that could actually end up being pretty good for some just generic AoE damage. Just get more dots out and everything, get again some bonus AoE from the Virulent Plague, and then that runic power helping your survivability with the Frost Fever. Again, we'll have to see exactly what it turns out to be with the reduced effectiveness. I'm not sure if it's working right now. It is working right now. I take it back. Are we going to get any runic power? Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe no runic power, in which case this is nowhere near as useful. Oh man, yeah, it seems that they have removed that. It's just going to do frost damage. This one will still do damage. It's still going to do a good chunk of damage when stuff dies, but it appears that Frost Fever not actually giving. I'm glad I tested that out right there. Wait, no, never mind. I take it back. It is generating runic power. We were just unlucky. It's just a chance. It's not a constant stream, but it is a chance. You can definitely see, like, I'm not spending anything, and you're getting rare ticks, but you are getting ticks of 5 runic power. This guy actually attacks, so I don't want to hit him. He could actually kill us. Well, maybe not so much in a tank, but yeah, no, it does work. So it does work. It's just a bit rare, but in AoE, that could scale up and be pretty good. So could be a good option. Could be a good option. There you go. You can see, hey, in terms of the damage, it's a decent little bit extra. It's not too shabby. There you are. For the Blood Death Knight specific legendaries, then, we have 4. The first one is called Bryndower's Might. Death Strike will refund 15% of runic power spent if it heals you for more than 10% of your maximum health. It is by default, at a minimum, healing you for 10% of your maximum health. So it should be relatively consistent that you do trigger this refund, and it's just going to, help you get more consistent death strikes out. So that's a pretty good thing. I think, it's relatively subtle, but if you consider just how much of an impact that ossuary can have on your death strike healing and how much more powerful that can actually make you feel and end up being in practice, this one could be kind of better than it sounds. I suspect we'll have to see with some more gameplay. But the other option here we have another one, which is Crimson Rune Weapon. When a charge of Bone Shield is consumed, the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon is reduced by 3 seconds. Additionally, when Dancing Rune Weapon fades, your rune regeneration rate is increased by 40% for 10 seconds. So, hey, kind of nice. Again, it's going to help your damage. Could really help your run through like a Mythic Plus where you're in that sort of time limit, and Dancing Rune Weapon is going to add a good chunk of extra damage. Get that up more often, get more damage out of it. And then also be getting that rune regen rate afterwards. So just kind of boosting up your AoE damage even more. Spamming out more Heart Strikes most likely could be pretty good. So that one could be fun to kind of play around that cooldown more. The third one here is Gorfiend's Domination. Heart Strike reduces the remaining cooldown on Vampiric Blood by 2 seconds. So, Vamp Blood is a 1.5 minute CD, so if you're doing your rotation properly, this is going to give you a nice bit of cooldown reduction. Vamp Blood is... I guess one thing to bear in mind is it's not, it's a decent cooldown, but it's not absolutely insane, and 1.5 minutes isn't too bad. And you do have like these mini cooldowns at Rune Tap now to sort of help you get through things a little bit easier. but this is nonetheless still going to be a pretty good increase and a pretty nice survivability thing. So yeah, definitely one to look at. And the final legendary then is called the Vampiric Aura. This one is probably the most exciting one. Well, I find it exciting. Some people might hate this. It's kind of a love-hate thing. Let me know what you think. But your Vampiric Blood ability will also affect all party members for half of the effect it has on you. This could be amazing. I guess it could be amazing in PvP. Certainly in Mythic Plus, this could be very useful for like tough AoE bosses. They're going to do a lot of party-wide damage. Well, you can pop your Vamp Blood. You're going to give your whole team 15% more max health and make them take, I guess, what's that, 17.5% more healing and absorbing for 12 seconds. So pretty nice, right? I think this is quite a lot of fun. I like these little, you know, I don't want obviously every ability, every legendary to be like a utility help out your team thing, but I do like seeing the odd little help your team effect worked in here every now and then in Shadowlands. So to me, that one is very cool. I love that one. I think it's neat. Yeah, there you go. A bit reminiscent of like giving your team like leech and stuff in Legion with your artifact ability, wasn't it? So I think it's quite cool. And there you go. Final piece to look at then here in this Blood DK video are the Conduits. These slot into your Soulbind trees. There should be an example here of a tree in the background. There are Endurance Conduits, which boost your survivability, Finesse Conduits, which boost your utility, and Potency, which will boost your damage and healing done. And you can get an idea with that example in the background of the sort of a path that you could take through and the types of conduit slots that you might be able to use on any given path that you take through the tree. First up, let's look at the Endurance Conduits. There are actually 5 for the Blood DK. 3 of them are for all Death Knights, so let's look at those first. First up, we have Hardened Bones. While Lichborn is active, the damage you take is reduced by 5%. That actually scales up to 15% damage reduction. So I think this is actually quite nifty. You know, like I think the other Death Knight specs are a lot more likely to use Lichborn for some self-healing with Death Coil, but you know, your self-healing as a Blood DK is already so strong with Death Strike, and you've got, you know, legendaries that might work with your Death Strike, and obviously talents that do that. You're most likely gonna be Death Striking to heal yourself as a Blood DK. This helps Lichborn be kind of more powerful, not just then as that utility as CD, helping you get out of certain forms of crowd control, but also being a nice little bit of extra damage reduction, which I think is quite cool. So kind of nifty. Insatiable Appetite then looks pretty damn good. Death Strike's minimum healing is increased by 1%. This actually goes up to a bonus of 8%. So yeah, I mean, if this can make Death Strike heal you for 18% minimum maximum health instead of 10% minimum maximum health, that could be very good for the Blood DK. This could be extremely good. This could end up being a mandatory conduit, so keep your eyes on this one. And then the third for all Death Knight conduits is Reinforced Shell. Anti-magic zone's radius is increased by 10% and the duration is increased by 1 second. This actually goes up to 8 seconds increased cooldown, giving you an 18-second anti-magic zone, which is quite nifty actually. Obviously the extra radius is a very pleasant perk. This is really going to be if your team really needs it for a particular raid fight. This could be amazing in PvP, of course. Give a lot of protection to your team for a lot longer. Or again, if like particular dungeons have periods of extended magic damage, this could be really good. I don't see this one being all that essential though. This seems like more niche. For the Blood Death Knight specific endurance conduits, there are 2. The first one is Blood Bond. Rune Tap heals you and your party for 5% of your maximum health. That scales up to 15% of your maximum health. Again, Rune Tap is the tap that gives you 20% damage reduction for 4 seconds. So I think that's pretty good, you know, like you're often going to be using this in situations where you are actually in risk of taking some very dangerous damage, like a big burst of damage. So just making sure that max health heal is coming in, I think that's a nice little perk. And of course, you know, healing your party as well, I think is pretty cool. Then Meat Shield is the next one. It increases the duration of your dancing rune weapon by 3 seconds, and while your rune weapon is active, your parries will increase your maximum health by 1%, stacking up to 2 times for 15 seconds. So not the most interesting thing at the first rank, but this actually goes up to 8% max health bonus. So could actually be pretty good. You know, 8% max health stacking 2 times, 16% max health for 15 seconds. That's not terrible. That's not terrible at all. And of course, we do have that Crimson Rune Weapon Legendary, which is going to keep reducing the cooldown of our Dancing Rune Weapon. So I think you put those together and they could be a nice little conduit combo with Legendary. So kind of nice to see that one. For the Finesse Conduits boosting our utility, we have Chilled Resilience. Icebound Fortitude's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. This goes down to 60 seconds cooldown reduction, bringing Icebound Fortitude from a 3-minute cooldown to a 2-minute cooldown. So that's not a terrible little perk, not too bad. Yeah, kind of welcome. And you might be grabbing this one in your Finesse Conduit slot because it gives you that survivability. That being said, the next couple of options I think are very good as well. Fleeting Wind is next, with Death's Advance giving an additional 10% move speed over the first 3 seconds. This actually goes up to 30% bonus movement speed. So obviously as a Death Knight, you're quite a slow class, quite a wheelchair class. Anything that boosts your mobility is going to be very welcome. And then next up we have Spirit Drain, where successfully interrupting an enemy with Mind Freeze will give 10 runic power. It looks like, guessing from how these ranks seem to work, that this could go up to 40 runic power on a successful Mind Freeze, which is phenomenally good. Again, with Ossuary and higher up on, once you have those bone shields going, Death Strike does cost 40 runic power. So in other words, a successful interrupt with Mind Freeze, which you can do every 15 seconds, you're going to do this all the time in Mythic Plus, it's going to give you a free Death Strike, essentially, which is insanely good. So yeah, that one kind of blowing my mind right now for how nice that is going to feel in Mythic Plus. It's going to feel so good. And then finally we have Unending Grip. Death Grip will slow enemy movement speed by 25% for, I presume, about 4 or 5 seconds, something like that. Looks like that goes to 60% movement speed reduction. I think that's really more the PvP thing. Like, you're going to grip in like a caster in PvP, and then you want them to be slow when they're trying to run away from you. Doesn't really seem all that useful in PvE, and that's okay. So there you go. They're the Finesse Conduits. For your Potency Conduits for Blood DK, obviously Blood DK is a couple of extra Endurance Conduits, whereas the DPS classes of extra Potency ones. So there's only 2 options here. The first one is Withering Plague. Heart Strike does 10% increased damage to enemies infected by Blood Plague. That goes up to 35% increased damage, so it's pretty boring, just more damage. It's nice, could be good when you can afford it. It's okay. And then we have the Debilitating Malady, where Blood Boil will increase the damage enemies take from your Blood Plague by 1% for 6 seconds, and that will stack up to 3 times. And that it starts pretty weak, but at the max rank of the Conduit, that's 10% more damage from your Blood Plague for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So you can certainly play around with this one a little bit. You can pool your charges of Blood Boil to try to ensure that you try to maintain this buff as much as possible and try to stack it up as much as possible, which is kind of nice. Obviously, this could go well with the Rapid Decomposition talent in the level 25 row, which will now make your Blood Plague leech 50% more health for you. So, buffing that by an extra potential 30% could be quite nice. So, yeah, I actually think this one's quite good. There's a little bit of gameplay there in terms of making sure to space out your Blood Boils as much as possible for that little bit of extra AoE damage and AoE healing, which I think is quite fun. So, not a terrible one there. Not a terrible one at all. So, those are all the different pieces of the Blood Death Knight on the Shadowlands beta. The big question then is the spec any fun? How's it playing? Is it playing well? How's it looking for Shadowlands? Well, I definitely think, much like all the Death Knight specs, that Blizzard sat down for this expansion and they said, guys, this is the Shadowlands expansion, okay? This is the expansion about the afterlife, about death, frickin' the Lich King's involved. Death Knights have got to be good. Death Knights have got to be a great class. And they've done that with the Blood spec as well, I think. I think it's looking really, really nice. To start with a small change first that I do want to touch on is that I think the core gameplay flows pretty much the same as it did in BFA. There's not really much changes there. However, the one little change that I was very worried about at the start, like when I was picking up this spec, because I'm not a Blood DK main at all, but having Blood Tap and Rune Tap, these 2 extra abilities with 2 charges that you can manage. Again, Blood Tap is something you can pop off GCD to restore a rune. Rune Tap is a charge you can pop off GCD to give you 20% damage reduction for 4 seconds. I was actually kind of intimidated by that and worried by that. I said, that seems like quite a lot of extra little management stuff for me to handle here, trying to test this spec for you guys on the beta. But when I actually sat down and played it, I found that it felt actually really good, and it flowed really well, and I actually really enjoyed having these abilities. If you are a player that enjoys managing, 2 charges of abilities. You're going to have 2 charges of Blood Boil to manage, 2 charges of Blood Tap, and 2 charges of Rune Tap. So this is the spec of 2 charges for you if you enjoy that stuff. But yeah, I actually think if you leave Shadowlands and go back to play on BFA, you'd probably find that core rotation a little bit more boring. You'd miss that extra little management aspect and having those little extra things to throw into that very, very core gameplay, that just straightforward, your basic rotation. I think they add that little bit of extra flair for an otherwise mostly unchanged core rotation. The bigger thing, though, that Blood DK is getting, and Death Knights are getting as a whole, is just some awesome class fantasy, class utility, and unpruning. It's so good. I love the new rune forges. Oh, they are so awesome, so cool. For example, the Sanguination, you can affix the rune of Sanguination to your weapon, which is going to give Death Strike this scaling execute damage. Super cool. And also it will proc a big heal on yourself, a big max health heal for like half of your health when you fall into execute range yourself. I think that's so cool. Really fits the Death Knight theme very well. Or again, you've got the rune of spell warding, which will deflect 3% of magic damage you receive. Also debuffs people that cast spells at you, lowering their cast speed, can proc a magic shield on yourself. Really interesting. And there's just loads of these new runes. The rune of Hysteria, which gives you more runic power generation and more maximum runic power. Really nice interaction there again with the Blood DK spec. You know, the nice thing about these rune forges is that they're situational as well. You know, you're not going to run just the one rune forge for the whole expansion, or at least I hope not with the tuning. It certainly seems in their design intent, and I think it looks like they have achieved it. You will switch up your rune forges depending on, you know, what dungeon you're doing, what raid fight you're currently progressing on, what team you're playing with in PvP. You're going to mix those things up, and I think that's super fun and taps into something that the Death Knight should do, which is, you know, having these different runic powers with their swords that, you know, other classes just don't have. And I think that's fantastic. And then just some of the cross-class benefits that are coming in are super cool for Blood DK as well. I love my ghoul. I love fighting alongside a ghoul, just raising him up, and he's just gonna hang out and have some fun. So much flavor and just a fun ability. Lichborn is awesome as well, turning undead, being immune to you know, fears, etc. I think that's really nice. Chains of Ice coming is actually a nice utility perk for Blood DK for sure. That just spammable rune cost, a single target slow. Very nice for some kiting in Mythic Plus or locking down enemies in PvP if you're gonna PvP as a Blood DK. And then, of course, Anti-Magic Zone. What a stellar ability here. So cool. Throw down that big bubble. Protect your team from 20% magic damage for the 10 seconds they're standing inside that. Just awesome group utility. Yeah, I just absolutely love it. We also have, yeah, lots of improvements, I think, to the talent tree. Blizzard is trying to rebalance those talents and break out of some of the cookie cutter stuff, and some of them look pretty good. Again, my favorite one for sure was the Mark of Blood. It shows you what a small change can do to really completely reinvent a talent. You know, where Mark of Blood before had this big runic power cost, which made it very off-putting because you had to give up your death strikes. Well, Blizzard said, you know what, let's make this just really cool. 6-second cooldown. Put a debuff on targets that lasts for 15 seconds. No runic power cost, just has that little cooldown. And then whenever that target attacks somebody, they'll actually heal them for 3% of their maximum health. So you can use this to help out your co-tank in raids. You could use this to help out, you know, people that are being fixated by mobs in Mythic Plus. You can use it to help out yourself. It does, you know, with 15-second debuff, 6-second cooldown. Again, it kind of, this is your 2-charge system in a big way. You're going to be essentially juggling having 2 of these debuffs at the same time. So if you like 2 charges of Blood Boil, 2 charges of your 2 taps, and you like having 2 marks of blood out and juggling what targets those are on, you're going to like Blood Decay, which I thought was a bit of a laugh. But yeah, man, I think it's just awesome. Covenant abilities are also fantastic. Really cool stuff there. I mean, Abomination Limb for the Necrolords, so awesome. Big AoE burst cooldown on a 2-minute CD and gripping people in. You gotta love grips if you're a Blood DK, right? Because you've already got your single target grip. You've got your Gorfiend's Grasp AoE grip. Now you can take the Abomination Limb for even more grips. I thought just on the whole, though, the Covenant abilities all seem to have a unique place for the Blood DK. They all do something a little bit different. It's going to be a difficult decision, actually, to choose which one. But yeah, again, so lots of cool new toys. I think that's how I would certainly describe the Blood DK. Lots of fun new toys to add to your toolkit. And these buttons are nearly universally across the board going to be very satisfying to press. They all have a purpose, they have a place, and they're going to feel really cool. And it's going to feel like you've got, yeah, just these new tools, these new things to use. which is great. And I think, again, the core gameplay of Blood DK is still nice, right? That vampiric, that self-healing type of tank. Where your health bar is, you know, it can be a bit of a yo-yo. It's bouncing up and down pretty quickly. It can be a bit spooky to play sometimes. But as that spec, that really is all about self-healing. Taking big hits, but then healing those big hits up. And that theme just runs through the spec, and I think it works really well. You know, it has its obvious weaknesses, and it has its obvious strengths, and I think that is good. And again, with the anti-magic zone, anti-magic shell, it's kind of like the opposite of a brewmaster, I guess. Where with the Brewmaster, you have that really smooth physical damage intake. You're really good at dealing with that physical damage, and you're super mobile. And then you got the Blood DK, which is quite slow, and it's the yo-yo health bar. You know, it's bouncing up and down. But then you've got loads of these tools, the anti-magic zone, anti-magic shell, etc., self-healing to deal with magic damage. I think they make a good combo. And yeah, I really enjoy both sides of that spectrum, I have to say. But yeah, there you go, guys. That is the Blood DK. I think lots of nice new perks coming in, very, very nice, and it still has that core self-healing gameplay. If you like that self-healing tank and you can enjoy the gripping utility, you're gonna love it still. So yeah, Blood DK, definitely a thumbs up for me. I think, like I said, this is the expansion of the Death Knight. It's looking awesome. So there you go. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.